From the rainbow-hued pearl lobsters of Indonesia and the baby eels of Spain, to the giant Copper River King salmon of Alaska, and Nigeria's cod stockfish dried thousands of miles away in the cold winds of Norway, we uncovered the stories behind 6 of the world's most expensive kinds of seafood. Our first stop is on the northeast coast of the US, where fishers in Maine can find the greatest quantities of American lobster. From there, they can sell to popular restaurants like this one in New York City, where they charge over $30 for a fresh 4-ounce lobster roll. So what made this crustacean go from prison food to a well-known delicacy? And why are lobsters so expensive?
It's no secret that lobsters are pricey, and a standard lobster dinner in a restaurant can set you back $38 or more. There are a lot of species of lobster, but we're interested in the recognisable clawed lobsters you might see on the menu, Homarus americanus and Homarus gammarus, better known as American and European lobster. These two species are very similar. The biggest difference is their colour. We went to Ed's Lobster Bar in New York City to speak to someone who has a lot of experience buying, preparing and cooking the crustacean.
So one of the hardest things about working lobster is, truthfully, it's the price range of lobster, and it fluctuates greatly and from year to year, and the price increases. And the yield when you clean a lobster is very low. So you could buy 1.5 pound lobster. I think this is what most people don't understand, is in 1.5 pound lobster, there's probably only 4 ounces of meat out of a hard shell lobster. So there's not much yield that comes out of the lobster. So when you're cleaning the lobster yourself to make lobster rolls, it really turns into a very, very expensive product.
To fully understand what makes lobsters so expensive, we need to take a look at its history, because it wasn't always as revered as it is now. Lobster's history varies across the world, but for a long time it was a source of food for many of the poorest in society. During the Viking era, lobsters as food became much more popular in Northern Europe, as boats more suited to deep-sea fishing became available. And by establishing meat-free days for certain religious holidays, the church also increased demand for seafood, including lobster. Across Europe, lobsters became associated with status and a lavish lifestyle, and they were often featured in paintings to show wealth. But the value of lobster remained low in North America. Native Americans used lobsters as fishing bait and crop fertilizer, a practice that European colonists later copied. During the 1600s, American lobsters were dirt cheap because they were so plentiful. Lobster became known as the poor man's protein among European settlers, and the shellfish was often served to imprisoned and enslaved people. That reputation in the US didn't turn around until the advent of railway transportation in the mid-1800s. Lobsters started to be served on trains across the country, and passengers soon became fans of the exotic-seeming dish. For a better taste, chefs began cooking lobster alive, which they still do today. Unlike many other foods, lobster wasn't rationed in the United States during World War II, and the lack of other meat options led many more people to discover this delicacy. The shellfish's surging popularity reduced the stocks of lobsters and drove up the price, and lobster became a gourmet dish often associated with living the high life. Even when the supply of these crustaceans is high, the price doesn't drop due to the logistics involved. Successfully catching lobsters is no easy task. They're caught using traps, which have to all be baited and dropped to the ocean floor. Even if the traps are full when the lobstermen return, they might have to throw a lot back due to regulations. The crustaceans are put back if they're too big, too small, or if they're female lobsters carrying eggs. The ones that make the cut have their claws bound and are placed on ice before being taken back to shore. They're then kept in saltwater tanks and shipped live. They need to be kept cool and moist, as well as get enough oxygen to survive the journey, all of which increases the cost to distribute them. A commercial lobster farm could help reduce costs, but it's very difficult to successfully farm American or European lobsters. Out of 50,000 eggs, only 2 lobsters typically survive to reach legal size. And if the lobsters don't get enough food, they become cannibalistic. They're also highly susceptible to contagious diseases, particularly in confined spaces. On top of all that, they grow very slowly. It takes around 7 years for a lobster to mature to the required harvesting size. Regardless, lobster catches have been increasing since 1980, and wild lobster populations have been holding steady, possibly thanks to global warming. Climate change has led to warmer waters and therefore longer life cycles and higher fertility for lobsters. Even when there's plenty of lobster to go around, it's still expensive. In 2017, the price of Maine lobster increased because of the high demand for lobster rolls, despite a record catch the year before.
The wholesale price for lobster can fluctuate anywhere from $8 to $10 depending on the season per pound. So right now, market price at Ed's Lobster Bar, we charge $38 for a pound and a half lobster. And our lobster roll is $34 for a 4-ounce lobster roll. And if we all stop and move out of the way, the lobster delivery is going to come in.
Ed's Lobster Bar gets daily shipments of 150 to 200 pounds of fresh Maine lobster.
All of our lobster shipments are for a day or a day and a half max. Nothing ever sits in the restaurant over 2 days. So the reason why you want to cook lobsters live is, number one, because a dead lobster is not going to be good. When the lobster is dead, the meat is going to turn to mush, it's going to smell bad, and you really can't eat it. It kind of disintegrates inside the shell. And if you actually served or ate that, you're definitely going to get sick. So you always want to make sure the lobster is alive and kicking before you cook it.
Lobsters have become a favourite summertime treat. On a busy night, Ed's will sell 150 lobster rolls.
You know, summer is definitely the season for lobster rolls. It's when it's everybody's thought process. Here in New York City, everybody's coming in the summer that can't get down to the beach because they want to get their lobster roll fix.
People just can't seem to get enough lobster. But a shortage in the US may be coming soon. Lobster fishers use herring as bait, and there's about to be a lot less of them. Because of concerns about overfishing, the New England Fishery Management Council last year voted to limit fishers to about 46 million pounds of herring this year. In 2014, fishers caught 200 million pounds of herring. With so much less available to buy, the price of herring will likely rise, which would in turn make lobster even more expensive. And will people be willing to pay even more for their lobster?
You know, I'm very concerned about lobster prices rising. It seems to be the bottom just keeps going higher and higher every year. I don't believe the consumer is willing to continually absorb the price increase that we have to absorb as restaurant owners selling lobster.
Keep going, keep going.
Often referred to as the Wagyu of salmon, Copper River King salmon can cost up to $120 per pound.
So like retail price, $1,500, $2,000 right here.
That's 6 times as much as other wild salmon, and 10 times more than farmed salmon. This salmon is extremely rare to come by. For fishers in Cordova, Alaska, it means spending entire days in dangerous waters, using life-threatening equipment and spending thousands of dollars on a permit. All with the serious chance of coming back to port empty-handed. King salmon, also called Chinook salmon, is one of the 5 species of wild Pacific salmon swimming through the Alaskan waters. The Copper River King is the largest and most nutritious of them all.
The color of the Copper River salmon is just so vibrant. It's such a deep, deep red, and it's like one of those things when you see it, it's very obvious that that's a Copper River salmon, and it just tastes so buttery, it's amazing.
Kyle and his crew set sail in the early hours of the morning from the Cordova harbor. It will take them 2 hours to reach the delta of the Copper River. King salmon will stay in the Copper River Delta for only 3 to 6 weeks. Kings are the first wild salmon of the season, and the start of the season is unpredictable. Although it roughly always falls around mid-May, fishers won't know it's time to set sail until less than a day before.
We typically have such a short window to fish. It's really important for me to be able to make quick decisions.
Go, go, go.
The unpredictable outcome of each fishing run not only affects the price of each catch, but also builds up the excitement.
That's insane. That's insane.
The location is the first challenge for Kyle and his crew. The delta of the river is very large, and not a lot of salmon swim in that area, so fishers like Kyle have to take their boats to shallow waters.
It's extremely dangerous to fish for a Copper River King salmon. because they like to hang out in shallow waters, and when you're fishing in that area, you're a lot more exposed to Mother Nature. You know, the waves are crushing, they're breaking on top of you, and you're a lot more susceptible to capsizing your boat. We're about to pick our anchor, and then we're gonna make a set.
Once the anchor is set, the chances of catching anything are slim. King salmon makes up only a small percentage of the salmon in the Copper River. 90% is sockeye. That makes Kyle's job extremely difficult. Aside from that, local laws require he uses specific nets called gill nets. They're hung vertically to catch the fish by their gills.
Gill netting is an extremely effective way to catch these fish because each net is hand-built and completely customized. So, you know, for Copper River king salmon, we use a lot larger mesh size, around 6 inches, so the smaller fish swim right through it, and you know, when we are able to locate a king salmon, they fit perfectly in our net. King! Give me a second, I'll explain in a second. Should have pulled him over the bow. So what had happened was, you know, so king salmon, they're really large fish, and they typically don't really get stuck into the net. They usually just wrap up. So it's imperative that you have a dip net to catch them in case they pop out. And what had happened there was, it was the first king of the day. I was super excited. I had the net underneath, and it had already peaked and started to crown over the bow roller. And I tried to reach forward to pull it over, but because that it popped off and I was only holding the dip net with one hand, and because the king was so large, it overpowered me and it ended up swimming out.
But the same features that make gill nets such an effective way to catch king salmon are also what make using them so dangerous.
There are a lot of hazards and dangers using a gill net, specifically on deck for the crew, just because we are using hydraulic equipment to send the net out into the water. There's a lot of loose mesh that goes flying out, so any, you know, loose strings from a hoodie or shoelaces, all those are really prone to getting snagged.
Missed catches are common here in the Copper River. Even after spending his whole day out on the boat, Kyle has a serious chance of coming back empty-handed. That makes the fish that he does catch even more prized.
Oh. Yeah, go! Oh, woo! We just caught this toad of a Copper River king salmon. This one probably weighs probably 35 pounds. And for like retail price, this goes is like $1,500, $2,000 right here. And just for a size comparison, this is a Copper River sockeye salmon. Yeah, it's got a darker mouth. And then also on top of the spine, you'll see it's got spots along the line, and also this nice silver with spots on the tail as well. So this one right here is probably 22 pounds gross. It's a very beautiful, very fatty Copper River king salmon. Very excited that we got the first one on board. Day's getting started, and looking forward to catching many more.
The huge size of the Copper River king salmon is due to its migration. Wild salmon are born in freshwater streams like the Copper River, and then migrate to the ocean as juveniles. After spending most of their lives at sea, they return to their home to spawn. For the kings returning to the Copper River, this means enduring a 300-mile-long journey against a 7-mile-per-hour current, swimming between glaciers, and gaining 3,600 feet in elevation.
Copper River salmon have the most intense salmon migratory route out of any salmon in the world. Because of that long journey home, it has a huge impact on the flavor of the Copper River salmon. Because the moment the salmon enter, they go from the ocean, the seawater, and they hit that fresh water of the Copper River salmon, their body automatically changes into reproductive mode. So up until that day that they hit that fresh water, they're just feeding and building up fat to make that 300-mile long journey. Go, 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 go. Nice.
39,000 kings are set to return home to the Copper River this year, 13% below the 10-year average of 46,000. Out of these 39,000, fisheries are only permitted to catch less than half to ensure enough salmon make it up the river for future generations. Kyle is only allowed to go out once enough salmon have escaped the fishing ground and have started to make their way up the Copper River. The catch limit is different every day. It can be reached at any moment, and when it is, Kyle has to stop fishing and return to port immediately. But he still needs to bring home enough to keep his business running, and fishing in the Copper River bears high costs.
If I came back empty-handed, it would cost me, it could be anywhere from $300 to $600 in fuel and probably a chunk of my pride.
For a company like Kyle's, fuel can top $12,000 a season, but that's still significantly lower than the cost of a permit to commercially fish in these waters, which is $250,000.
When I first started commercial fishing, I did not save any of my catch for myself. Just because I had taken on so much debt to buy into the fishery, I couldn't afford to save any of the salmon for myself.
What about now?
I eat salmon very regularly now. All right, come. Okay. Yeah, come. Oh! Oh! Holy shit. Go. Oh my God, we got another one.
That's 6 kings.
Oh my God. That's insane. Last time of the day, we just brought in 7 Copper River Kings. Insane. Dude, that was bonkers.
Once Kyle returns to port, the fish must be filleted and packaged as soon as possible to preserve its nutritional value.
It takes us about a week to get our salmon to consumers. The moment our fishermen return to port, we'll fillet, portion, vacuum pack, and flash freeze for a minimum of 3 days. So then that way the seafood is consumable for sushi. It's considered sushi grade. They're so fatty, it's so oily, it's hard to hold on to them, they keep slipping.
Kyle sells his king salmon to fine dining and sushi restaurants, but also directly to customers across the country. Shipping out of Alaska can get very expensive because of its remote location. It costs him $65 to ship a 5-pound box of salmon from Cordova to New York. Due to an increase in demand, the price of king salmon has slowly gone up over the last 5 years. A pound of Copper River king salmon is now going for $100 to $120. Although bigger fish sell for more, huge king salmon are getting harder to come by. A 2020 study found that in the last 60 years, salmon in Alaska have been getting smaller, especially kings. Since 1960, king salmon have lost 8% in body length. Streams are warming earlier in the year, and salmon are making their migrations at a younger age and smaller size. There's also competition with other fish populations caused by hatcheries releasing the fish they produce into the sea. In the long term, this drop in size affects the salmon's commercial value, the transport of nutrients, egg production, and especially for king salmon, it reduces the supply for rural communities.
Salmon and seafood in Alaska is more than just more than a job. It's very deeply rooted into our traditions. We have very many rural communities in Alaska that rely on these wild salmon runs as like their only source of protein. So, they don't have, some of them, they don't have access to grocery stores. So it's really important that we have these salmon runs return for them.
This lobster is so valuable that people try to smuggle its larvae across international waters. The ornate tropical rock lobster, or the pearl lobster as it's better known, can cost nearly $100 a kilogram, making it 6 times as expensive as other popular varieties, like Maine lobsters. The colourful crustacean is one of the rarest and priciest lobsters you can find. Pearl lobsters are found throughout the Indian Ocean and West Pacific, but the waters around Indonesia are where their largest communities exist. They're known for their blue-green shells, rainbow-coloured spots, and extra long antennae. Pearl lobsters are also meatier and sweeter than other lobsters. In Ikas Bay, Indonesia, they're considered a popular delicacy and sold for a hefty profit.
Rasanya ini yang mungkin membuatnya populer dari lobster yang lain. Rasanya itu agak-agak manis dan gurih, enak, dan kalau digoreng itu rasanya pokoknya mantap dah.
Abdul Kasim has been fishing for lobsters for 29 years. Whenever it's not too windy, he takes his boat to rocky locations that could be home to pearl lobsters.
Kita belajar menangkap lobster ini sejak diajarkan oleh orang tua. Ini kalau kita bilang turun-temurun. Bagian tersulitnya adalah ketika kita menentukan lokasinya. Terkadang lokasi yang sudah kita gunakan itu mungkin di sana habis. Kemudian kita harus mencari lokasi yang baru lagi untuk menangkap lobster.
The fishers leave their nets out overnight and return in the morning. They also catch sand lobsters, but pearl lobsters are worth a lot more.
Seperti kalau harga dari lobster mutiara itu 1 juta, itu kalau perbandingan untuk pasir itu palinglah 500.000. Oleh sebab itu kalau di bulan Januari sampai Februari itu nyampe dia sampai 1.500.000 per kilogram untuk yang alam. Sementara di bulan lain mungkin berkisar antara 1 juta atau 1.150.000 itu saja kan.
Any lobsters that are large enough to be sold are brought to a seller. Due to government regulations, pearl lobsters that weigh less than 200 grams must be brought to a breeder. Breeders like Merdium raise pearl lobsters in captivity. This method ensures a more reliable supply of lobsters.
Saya tertarik karena hasilnya sangat mendukung untuk keluarga kami, keluarga saya gitu, untuk membiayai sekolah anak saya dan kebutuhan lain-lainnya.
But keeping them healthy is no easy feat. The lobster larvae, or seeds as they're called, are placed in nets that float directly in the ocean, exposed to natural elements. Merdim takes his boat out to feed the lobsters every day. It takes 18 months to fully breed pearl lobster seeds.
Ya memang agak sulit dan agak susah lobster mutiara itu dibudidayakan karena agak rentan penyakitnya, mudah kena diserang penyakit lah gitu, dan terlalu mahal bibitnya juga.
The lobsters are also often attacked by pufferfish and barracudas, who eat their legs. If a lobster loses 2 legs from the same side, it's considered defective and can't be sold.
Ya biasa kita kerjakan, kita lepas 50 ekor. Yang 50 gram itu kita lepas 50 ekor yang 1 jaring. Terus sampai pemanenan gitu sekitar 40 ekoran, itu sekitar 10% dah, Mbak.
The surviving lobsters will grow from 50 grams to the preferred selling weight of 500 grams. To help protect their lobsters, breeders check on the nets throughout the week and repair any damage. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it, since pearl lobsters have become one of the most valuable resources at Indonesian fisheries. To help strengthen the country's lobster farming industry, the Indonesian government has banned the export of all lobster larvae. This measure is also meant to protect its wild lobster populations. However, theft and international smuggling attempts of Indonesia's lobster larvae have not stopped. Back in autumn 2022, authorities caught smugglers transporting $2.2 million worth of lobster larvae. The Indonesian government estimates that the country lost more than $64 million in revenue to illegal exports in 2019.
The demand for Indonesian lobsters, particularly pearl lobsters, is very high in countries like Singapore, China, and Vietnam. Pearl lobsters aren't even always available in Indonesia.
Tidak juga sih, tidak semua menjual lobster mutiara. Satu, kualitasnya memang dia bagus, juga yang paling mahal di atas rata-rata yang membeli lobster mutiara itu biasanya orang-orang yang pengunjung, pendatang, baik lokal, domestik ataupun juga orang-orang luar negeri.
Many restaurants and hotels also buy pearl lobsters, driving up the demand and prices. The time of year impacts how expensive a pearl lobster will be as well. Lobsters are more expensive in January and February because of all the Chinese New Year celebrations. Prices are also higher from August to September, when international tourists come to visit. During these months, captive pearl lobsters sell for around $50 per kilogram, and wild pearl lobsters can sell for as much as $75 per kilogram. Wild pearl lobsters are always more expensive because they tend to be larger than their captive counterparts. They also weigh more, even when they're the same size, so there's more meat to enjoy.
Untuk skala rasa, saya lebih memilih lobster mutiara ya, dibandingkan lobster yang Pakistan dan lainnya. Dan harganya juga sepadan dengan rasa lobster mutiara itu tersendiri. Pada dasarnya lobster semua sama, tapi bagi saya mungkin lobster mutiara ini lebih empuk dan enak juga ya untuk dirasa.
Despite the extravagant cost, one of the most popular ways to eat pearl lobster is grilling it as a local outdoor restaurant.
Ya, saya cukup lumayan sering mengkonsumsi lobster mutiara sebulan sekali mungkin, atau sebulan 2 kali. Biasa juga saya bawa ke restoran untuk dibakar, atau saya bawa pulang ke rumah untuk digoreng dengan bumbu sendiri. Lobster mutiara memiliki tekstur yang empuk di lidah dan dagingnya tebal, juga memiliki rasa manis lah.
But despite pearl lobster's popularity in Indonesia and throughout Asia, its price has actually fallen over the years. And its fluctuating value is concerning for the people whose livelihoods depend on it.
Harapan kami sebagai nelayan lobster di sini kepada pemerintah untuk stabilkan harga. Kita cuma butuh harga di sini untuk distabilkan, jangan sampai harganya terlalu anjlok dan drop. Karena kita juga butuh keuangan yang cukup untuk memenuhi segala kebutuhan keluarga.
Almost everyone at this market in Lagos, Nigeria, is here to buy stockfish. A coveted source of protein, it sells for $65 per kilogram, 7 times as much as other popular fish like croaker. But no one in Nigeria can actually produce this unique dried cod. The fish comes from thousands of miles away in Norway, where entire operations are dedicated to supplying the stockfish demand in Nigeria.
It's 99.9% for Nigeria.
A full drying rack like this is worth over $500,000. But because the supply from Norway is volatile, prices fluctuate, and sellers here in Nigeria have no control over how much fish gets here.
We add our stockfish. The stockfish is very important to Nigerian cuisine because of the texture and flavor it gives to the dish, especially when you want to have that local smell, local aroma to your food.
This is the fishing village of Henningsvær in Lofoten, Norway. It's the ideal location for drying stockfish. Cod migrates here at the start of the winter. After it's caught, the fish is graded by size and tied to be hung on racks, heads and bodies separately. The weather here is cold, dry, and reaches -10 to -15 degrees Celsius with wind chill. It's so cold that there are no insects that could eat the fish, but not cold enough to freeze the fish. And it dries the fish so much that after a few weeks, not even birds are interested in it anymore. These racks have the capacity for as much as 4,000 metric tons of stockfish.
It's a way of conservation. You know, the yield is 23%, so that means that we take out all the water. It's a way of preserving the proteins.
Exposed in the freezing wind, it takes 3 months for cod to fully dry and become stockfish. Once that happens, stockfish can be stored for up to 3 years, making it an extremely valuable resource. This is a longer method than using salt or artificial dryers, which can dry cod in a week, but the long wait pays off. Companies like Nora's buy fresh cod for 52 kroner, a little less than $5 per kilogram from fishers. Once dried, its bulk price is around 150 kroner per kilogram. In Nigeria, it won't be sold in kilograms, but in 30-kilogram bags.
These heads, after 2 months approximately, we can take it indoor after dry it, and we press it into 30-kilo jute bags and ship in 40-feet containers, and it all goes to Nigeria, yes.
Up until 60 years ago, the word stockfish meant little to nothing in Nigeria. But after the Nigerian Civil War killed more than 1 million people, mostly of starvation in the late 60s, everything changed. Among the emergency supplies other countries sent to Nigeria to combat the famine, Norway sent stockfish. While Norwegians still eat it in restaurants now, almost 100% of the stockfish produced in Norway is headed to Nigeria, especially for home cooking. In 2015, Nigeria imported $8.94 million worth of stockfish from Norway.
No, this call from Norway. We don't have challenge selling stockfish when we import it, and we sell as much as we bring.
Nonso is a stockfish dealer. He's spent 20 years in the business, going from retailing to dealing directly with imports. He sells his stockfish at the Otto White Sand Market in Lagos, Nigeria.
Stockfish, it comes in different species. So there is the health aspect of it, which is also into 3 types. There's one that comes with jaw, there's one that comes without jaw. There's also type of different heads. So the same way it is different, the prices are different. So into that meat, there are also 2 types of the meats. There are the one without skin and the one with skin. Then aside from that one too, there is also the body, the long one. That one also is more expensive, and even in that body there are up to 4 different types.
The hot and humid climate makes it impossible for stockfish to be dried here, so importing it is the only option. The stockfish takes 6 weeks to get to Nonso from Norway.
A bag of body here is above $500 and above 300,000. Then the main body, the long one, is up to 800,000 to 900,000 here, which is almost close to $1,000 above.
But those prices will not be the same tomorrow. Prices fluctuate depending on the season, and because it's a more convenient trade currency than Norwegian kroner, prices are set in US dollars. They depend on the naira to dollar exchange rate of the day. And even then, there are 2 different exchange rates: the official one, set by the Central Bank of Nigeria, and the black market rate. Black market rates, although unofficial, often give a better picture of the real market conditions.
Most of us end up going for black market because you can be in a queue for dollar for months.
In Nigeria, these 2 exchange rates are very different. Which one you pick to sell your stockfish can make or break a business like Nonso's.
That's a major challenge in every business in this country. the restriction and access to gold. The difference between government rates and black market is over 100. That's a lot of money. So it makes the business difficult and also makes it expensive for consumers. So it's a very big challenge. But for now, for what dealing with this, I don't have much option. I have to continue our business.
In 2021, to encourage local fish farming, the Nigerian government added stockfish to a list of over 40 items that importers have to buy with actual US dollars, not naira converted into the same amount. For Nonso, this made trading stockfish even more challenging.
15 years ago, a container of stockfish could be around 7-8 million naira. But today, a container of stockfish with worth between $75,000 to $80,000. In current black market range, prices are about from 17 million to 50 million. Because of the challenges of accessing forests through central bank normal rents, a lot of people have left the business.
The rise in energy costs has also made the operations in Norway more expensive to run, and that also reflects on the final price at the market here.
Because the people go for which one they can afford. So now they are being a method that instead of allowing to be there to spoil, we now start slashing. So when you move around the market, you'll see people slashing the stockfish to a smaller size that people can afford.
I really can't place a time frame to how long I've been cooking stockfish. I grew up knowing stockfish. I learned to use stockfish also in cooking the local dishes, the local delicacies, especially our soup and stews. Here is our seafood okra in all its beauty. How lovely it looks. First of all, you feed with the eyes. The burst of flavors, the taste, all combining to give this wonderful aroma.
Back in Norway, the Nigerian market is too important to lose.
And it's funny because we have been trying to sell to other countries these products also, and every time we think we try to found a new market, then we find out that it was really the Nigerians living in the Netherlands or England or the US. So it's always the Nigerians who like this.
This kilogram of baby eels has just sold for over $7,000. Angulas are the young of the European eel. They're a delicacy in Spain, where every year they're auctioned off for thousands of dollars. But angulas are tiny. Fishers need to catch 3,000 of them to reach 1 kilo, a task that requires spending entire nights in the water, in total darkness, braving strong tides and stormy seas. And while angulas are prized for their crunchy texture, they have a very mild taste, almost non-existent.
Lo que hace a la angula tan especial es la finura que tiene en boca a la hora de comer.
It's midnight in Ribadesella, in the north of Spain. And it's the first day of the baby eel season.
Esperemos pescar algo. Mucho no, porque el tiempo no acompañó.
Manolo has been fishing eels for the last 33 years. He's one of 46 fishers here in Ribadesella who are licensed to fish angulas. Tonight marks the beginning of a 4-month-long season.
Cuando llega la temporada de la angula, yo me siento muy diferente. Me siento con ansia, me siento nervioso, a pesar de que ya son unos cuantos años, pero todavía noto como la primera.
The fishing takes place at night when the eels are most active.
miramos los mejores momentos, los más propicios para la pesca siempre es la pleamar.
The first thing Manolo does is assess the water. Right now, although awake, the eels are hiding in the sand, so he relies on the movement of the water to reveal them.
Nosotros lo que buscamos es más que nada el sitio donde las olas se juntan, porque trayendo la angula de un lado, trayendo la angula de otro, las deja siempre en esa zona.
To fish, Manolo uses a custom rake called a ceazo.
Entonces nosotros metemos el ceazo en el agua y levantamos antes que venga la ola de atrás. Es el ceazo bien asentado en el suelo, porque si te queda colgando, la angula que te pasa por abajo no entra en el ceazo.
Manolo's timing needs to be spot on. If he lifts the rake 1 second later than he should, the same wave that pushed the eel into his net can also wash it back into the sea.
Cayó. Estamos a la caza.
Even with the right equipment, baby eel fishing has a serious risk of coming back empty-handed. That's because there is one thing Manolo can't predict: the weather.
Nada, hoy es un día tranquilo. Normalmente esto es muy pocas veces. Lo que tiene que haber es temporal de mar, que haya mucho oleaje, que sean las olas grandes, que arrastre todo el fondo.
Tonight is also a full moon. While it may give him some light on this dark beach, it's not ideal, as some eels may confuse it with daytime and stay buried in the sand.
Lo que tenemos que buscar es cuanto más oscuro para la angula es mucho mejor. Pues no va bien la cosa. Bueno, se está acercando la hora, ¿eh? Vamos a cambiar de playa. Vamos a ir hasta la playa de San Antolín.
This change of beach is a gamble for Manolo. There is no guarantee there will be eels there. That's because much is still unknown about their life cycle. The Angulas' journey starts very far away, in the Sargasso Sea, a region of the Atlantic Ocean close to the Caribbean. There, adult eels spawn and die, and their hatchlings travel through the Gulf Stream until they reach the coast of Spain, seeking fresh water. When they arrive, the Angulas are transparent. As they move out of the salty ocean and into rivers, the higher temperature of the fresh water will turn them from transparent to black as they mature into adult eels. Catching them before this transition occurs is essential. But the eel's exact journey is unknown, and it's impossible to predict the number of angulas that will arrive at the start of the season.
Estos años de atrás vienen a hacerse pues unos 1.500, 1.700, aunque el año pasado disminuyó drásticamente hasta alcanzar unos 780 kilos aproximadamente.
This unpredictability makes Manolo's job even more difficult.
Pues con eso si cojo al final de la noche 50 gramos, ya son. Posiblemente sea el peor comienzo de hace mucho tiempo.
Although the night is not going so well, the eels Manolo finds tonight will be the most expensive of the season. That's because buyers will pay a premium for the first night's catch.
Mañana esperemos que tengan buen precio. Ah, mira, tenemos una. Ahí está. El récord me parece que eran sobre 5.000 euros y... mira, 3. 4.
Manolo caught 90 grams tonight. He doesn't know how much it will be worth yet. Before the eels are sold at the auction, workers at Ribadesella market clean them with a sponge to remove all the excess water that could affect their weight. 1.4 kilos arrived at the market today, the total catch of all fishers working last night. On a good day, the total catch can weigh 5 or 6 kilos. Today's low total will make this auction even more competitive. Bidders for the angulus are typically restaurants in the area, and the lucky chef who will get to cook the eels is there in person to make the bid.
Y cuando llega también la subasta y esa piquilla sana, esos nervios de a ver quién este año va a quedarse con la angula, también es emocionante.
Manuel is the chef at El Campanú, a restaurant in Riba de Sella. He holds the record for the highest ever bid. His restaurant paid €6,620 per kilo in 2019.
La subasta del pescado se hace a la holandesa. Esto lo que quiere decir es que se pone un precio alto y va descendiendo. Desciende de 10 en 10.
The auction itself is very quiet. It's done using a screen, and each buyer has a remote control that they use to make their bid.
¿Y sabes quién va a ser el que va a pelear contigo? Aquí tienes que ser un poco lince a la hora de tocar el botón.
Manuel made it. He gets to cook the first kilo of angulus of the season for €7,280. That's a new record high.
Yo me estaba fijando en la persona que iba y yo vi como hubo un movimiento ahí un poco extraño de esa persona hacia la puja y entonces calqué. Quedamos nosotros con la angula este año.
Out of the whole batch, those 90 grams that Manolo fished last night were worth €655 today.
Muy buen precio, muy contento. La pena es que se pescó poco, claro, por eso el precio que tiene. Pero contento. Todo bien.
But not all baby eels cost over €7,000. Cost is variable depending on the time of year. That's why for fishers like Manolo, it's impossible to rely on just angula fishing for a living.
El primer día, la subasta del primer día, económicamente para mí no supone mucho. Lo importante son los 3 meses y 29 días restantes.
Eel fishing here in Riba de Sella is heavily regulated. Fishers like Manolo are only allowed to fish baby eels between November and February, with 5 mandatory rest days each month. Each fisher needs to hold a license, and certain beaches are no fishing zones. Breaking any of these rules can cost as much as €6,000. These regulations mean that the price of angulus has skyrocketed in recent decades.
Cuando empecé a pescar con mi padre, yo llegué a vender la angula lo más barato a 8.000, 10.000, 12.000 pesetas de la época. Y ahora en las últimas campañas lo llegamos a vender hasta 810. Fue lo máximo que vendí. El kilo, 810 euros.
In the last 50 years, the demand for the increasingly scarce eels has risen so much that gulas, a cheaper copy of baby eels, were born. Gulas are made of surimi, the same fish paste used to make imitation crab, and cost 62 times less than angulus. They are now just as popular as the real thing. This makes cooking with real baby eels a delicate task for chefs like Manuel. He needs to make sure the subtle taste of the angulus shines through and that they don't lose their texture, or they could be mistaken for their cheap imitation. Angulus can't be cooked alive because they'll release slime, so Manuel treats them with a tobacco infusion first.
Y ahora ya estamos notando cómo la angula ya empieza a quedar tersa, a quedar más dura, va perdiendo la fuerza según va cogiendo la infusión de tabaco.
He then removes the unwanted slime by hand.
Por eso este proceso tiene que ser, es el más costoso, el que más tiempo lleva y el más delicado de todos. Lo más importante de limpiar la angula es que pierda esa merma para que no deje ese mal sabor que deja, cambia la textura y el sabor totalmente de la angula. Metemos agua hirviendo, cuando ya empieza a quedar blanca, sacamos la angula y directamente la pasamos a frío para cortar la cocción. Esa textura que tiene la angula, una textura blanda, combinando el ajo y el picante, es una explosión de sabores en la boca.
Despite the proliferation of gulas, in the last few years, real angulas have enjoyed increased popularity. The first day auctions generate a lot of buzz, with chefs arriving from all over Spain to make their bids.
La demanda en este primer día de subasta ha subido. Hay muchos más compradores en estos últimos 10 años y están dispuestos a pagar mucho más por ese primer kilo de angula.
Baby eels have become so popular that overfishing and smuggling are serious risks. In 2017, Spanish police uncovered an international trafficking operation headed for China, which included €2 million worth of angulas. But it's unclear if the seasons to come will be able to support this rise in demand. The European eel is listed as critically endangered, and fewer baby eels arrive at the beaches of Riba de Seja each year.
Llevo hacía 33 años que no perdí ninguno. Y sí es cierto que si miras a los años de atrás, de 10, de 15, de 20 años, las capturas bajaron. También bajaron los pescadores.
There are different theories for this decline, including climate change, habitat deterioration, pollution, and overfishing. But for Manolo, fishing angulas is not about money.
Pues la verdad que a mí la pesca de la angula me encanta. Son muchos años y ya desde pequeñín, que iba con mi padre con 13 añinos, 12 añinos, ya empecé a disfrutar porque me gustaba la pesca. A ver, yo me encanta estar aquí.
Oysters are a sure sign of high-end decadence. But look back 200 years and they were handed out as free bar snacks. So what made them the luxury food that they are today? Oysters have been around for a while. Estimates put the shellfish around 300 million years old, at least, and humans have been enjoying them for centuries. Oyster cultivation was invented by Sergius Arata, a Roman engineer also often credited with the invention of underfloor heating. And since his invention, oyster farming has become big business. While you may be seeing oysters on the menu more these days, their popularity now is nothing compared to just 200 years ago. Oyster sales boomed from the early 19th century onwards, and the shellfish were sold as street food across London, Paris, and New York as they remained a cheap and accessible snack to many. In 1860, the small British seaside town of Whitstable alone was sending 50 million tonnes of oysters to London each year. And by 1900, New York was eating 1 million oysters every day. But as their popularity grew, so did the problems. Industrialisation and dredging of the waters in England led to overfishing. And as more people moved to the coast, more and more sewage ended up dumped in oyster-growing waters. Soon there were outbreaks of typhoid and other diseases, and many oyster beds had to be closed. Hard winters and new diseases killed off many of the remaining native oysters, and gave the shellfish a bad reputation that lasted for years to come. There's something else that kept the price of oysters down around the turn of the century: child labour. In the early 20th century, American photographer Lewis Hine captured photographs of many of the children working in the oyster industry, even photographing 4-year-old Mary, who would apparently shuck 2 pots of oysters each day. Things had to change though. We soon realised the importance of clean water in the oyster growing process and outlawed child labour. Making oysters environmentally safe and ethical to grow came at a cost, as the shellfish take a lot of work to produce. And now, when oysters are raised, the environment they're grown in is one of the main considerations.
Here, there's no industry, there's very little even farming here. What you've got out in the loch is just everything that is naturally in the loch. So they're feeding on the best possible feed that you could want, and they couldn't be in any more natural product.
Each oyster takes 2 to 3 years to mature, and they start out microscopically small. The tiny shellfish are grown in hatcheries, When they're large enough, they're transplanted to their final growing place.
Well, we get the oysters in from our hatchery when they're about your thumbnail size. We will grow them in these baskets for approximately 2 to 3 years, and then we'll send them to the depuration centre for depurating and then for packing for dispatch.
At Loch Fyne, every oyster is depurated, a process that cleans the oysters and removes any dangerous bacteria. Every single oyster must be checked by hand. Making sure that each oyster is shipped live is paramount.
Believe it or not, we sell roughly about 35,000 oysters every week out of here, and every single oyster is individually checked. So what we would do is, when we're packing the oysters, we'd pick up 2 oysters and we would tap them together. Now you can obviously see that one's dead, but when you're packing thousands at a time, you won't necessarily see it, and sometimes it's only open just a little tiny bit. But when you tap that oyster, you can hear it's hollow straight away, and that is the best way to tell if an oyster's going to reach its shelf life, whether it should be discarded.
Oysters may only have a 9-day shelf life, but that doesn't stop them being shipped all across the globe. And their popularity and image as a luxury treat means that their demand is only going to rise.